And addiction is not just physical substance. You can be addicted to overthinking. You can be addicted to being busy. Whatever you do compulsively as a pain management strategy, when you know it is harming your relationship and yourself, is as dangerous as any drug. And perhaps more so because in our cult, we don't honor the distinction between compulsivity and enjoyment. We don't honor it. So it's an important part of the terrain. I've already mentioned sensitivity. Whenever there is a discrepancy in sensitivity, one person will be in pain at the point the other person is at an enjoyable level of arousal. As a general rule, for example, everyone has a stimulation threshold. You go to a party. Now, the people that have a low stimulation threshold, they want the music louder, they want to dance harder, they want more sex, more drugs, more this, more lights, so that they can reach peak arousal. By this time, people higher up on the continuum of sensitivity or stimulation, or stimulation threshold, are in complete agony. Now, the fact that this doesn't get talked about as a neuronal biological reality, and the fact that we are a masculine and chauvinistic culture, means that the sensitives feel apologetic, that they're the downers for the majority who want it louder, harder, faster. And the majority is typically abusive and insensitive because they have not been educated that there's a difference. It never occurred to them that just because they're a majority doesn't mean there aren't individuals with very different needs and very different biological frameworks. And so you have a lot of violation and a lot of apology. You get people who have been battered and shamed and battered, and then they apologize. They learn that to stop further abuse, they should apologize, own the problem as their own, when it in fact is a cultural problem. If you're in a culture that is so immature that it hasn't grasped that 10% of its people have very different needs and those need to be accommodated, you're just in a very immature, unfortunate culture. It's nothing to do with the minority. And this falls, is true in any case. The sophistication of a culture can be grasped in one metric by how responsive and caring it is for its minorities. Because almost everyone is a minority in some domain. This is just the sensitivity threshold. Now, the trauma symptoms and abuse symptoms are incredibly important to grasp, because when you have abuse contracts, when you have unresolved trauma, first of all, you regress, which is a very important thing to be aware of, because you can no longer expect responsible behavior from a regressed individual. It'd be nice, but it is irrational. In the same way, if you were playing football and you got triggered, and what triggered meant was suddenly you're 1 foot tall, it would be nice if you could still throw the ball and do this and that and the other, but the reality is you're going to be stepped on and crushed. It is irrational to expect responsible behavior from a regressed person, which is why it is a travesty as a culture that we regress people all the time by giving them shitloads of trauma in childhood, not teaching them how to deal with it. The only thing we teach them is that it's their fault and that their parent did nothing wrong and that they should be grateful and obey their parent or whatever. That doesn't work, of course, so then they distrust the whole culture and become cynics, which isn't generally terribly popular, though it is considered sophisticated. And so in this dynamic, there then become all these trigger points, which become associations for the trauma and that bring up a fight, flight, freeze with the reptilian brain. You cannot love someone in a reptilian brain. You can love them enough to help them out of it if you know what you're doing, which means you have to love them enough to learn what you're doing, which means you have to love them enough to become trauma literate. Well, very few people in our culture are trauma literate, understand the symptoms of trauma and how to respond. I didn't learn about this until I was 40 years old from a stranger in a cafe. And I had worked with 40 healers and therapeutic practitioners, didn't learn a goddamn thing about trauma. Looking back, I recognize severe traumatic symptoms in at least 30% of my lovers within the high community. And I have demonstrated severe trauma symptoms. Not one facilitator or one of those lovers either said, Dane, it looks like you're in trauma, let's help you like this. That would have been intelligent, but it would have required trauma literacy. And I never, when I saw clear trauma symptoms, said that's trauma, because I didn't know what it was. I thought trauma happened at the Iraqi, for Iraqi veterans, not for me. Now, my point in talking about all of this is not to cover the whole terrain. The psyche is vast. Our beliefs are unique. Our memories are distinct. Our bodies are different. But these are some of the very major highways within the terrain of relationship that I've navigated on my way to now being happily married. And almost everything that I've learned that is allowing me to grow the marriage and grow my self-love in a healthier direction is outside of this little circle, and I think it's important to communicate. If we want a world where we win and more people win, we need accurate maps. And so I'll just cover, a couple of the other things that, are important here. So trauma is huge. Lies and betrayal generally tie in with addiction and traumatic symptoms because it's human nature to be authentic. It's easier and it makes us stronger. The things that kind of teach us to lie and betray are abuse dynamics where we're little and there's a big abuser and the only way to survive is to lie because who we are is what is being attacked. That's what is being targeted in the abuse. And so it's very difficult. For example, when a Tantra teacher in high asked me to have an affair and not tell his partner who I knew, I called the high office and I said, this feels terrible. What do I do? And Penny said, stay out of it. It's not your thing. And I felt like I'm being corrupted and made into a secret keeper, where I'm now participating in the betrayal and abuse. And I'm not sticking up for integrity within my community, which is like saying I'm seeing a bleeding artery in my body, but I'm not going to repair it. I'm going to stay out of it and just let it bleed because it's not the artery that I'm supposed to be identifying with. That's over there. This is here. If it's a community, you care about everyone in that community. It is an illusion that we are dissociated, isolated individuals that have nothing to do with the larger ecologies in which we participate. How do you repair lies and betrayal other than to withdraw from it? And this is something I don't think we've really worked out, in higher or in our culture. How do you repair it? What do you do? And I think part of it, to go at a deep level, you've got to go into the child or the adolescent who decided and discovered that the only way to survive was to pretend to be something other than themselves. That who they were was fundamentally hated at some level because it challenged some part in the abuser that they couldn't accept in themselves. And so what was asked for is a lie. I've noticed that actually as I travel the world. Cultures and countries that have been invaded multiple times often have a very great surface pleaser that has nothing to do with their own authenticity. They want to find out what you want to hear, and then they want to give it to you, and it's a complete lie. But it's what you would have to do if you've been invaded and violated and abused by multiple opposing cultures, all of whom want compliance and will punish authenticity with a gunshot. You don't do it our way? Okay, you learn to lie pretty quickly in that dynamic. Love languages is, of course, a huge thing. We have an epidemic of people who do not feel loved because they don't take the time to learn their own love language and then communicate it and then negotiate. I'll give you love in your love language, you give love in my language, particularly for most of us that are still very adolescent and childlike in our needs. You need to negotiate. If you're an adult and you really can flood yourself with deep love and care at deep levels, you can enjoy parenting another grown-up child. Just how would you like your love today? Let me give it to you in this way. They may hate you, as all children do, if you don't foster their independence. It's very important if someone is in a childlike state that everything you do not only meets a need or whatever, but helps them move towards meeting it themselves. And that's something that is more important when there's an imbalance, which brings up another, danger point that isn't demarked. The more vertical a relationship, the more likely it is to trigger abuse contracts and to be an abusive relationship. It's relatively easy to bring out the best in one another when you are both secure in your survival, when you both have an abundance of love and belonging, when you both have high self-esteem, and you bring a good chunk of money to the table, a good set of life skills, and you are not in a dependent relationship where, like, I would be on the street if without you kind of thing. It's relatively easy to bring out one's best side. It's much harder the more vertical the relationship. Billionaire to homeless person, very prone to abuse. 60-year-old to 20-year-old, very prone to abuse. Father to daughter, very prone to abuse. Mom to child, teacher to student in a sociopathic education system, prone to abuse. When you've got a government that has all of the power and is more interested in protecting its own image, then they'll send the CIA around the world to hound Edward Snowden, as opposed to protecting the American people and telling them the truth. So the more vertical the relationship, the more crisis if one person is in crisis and the other person is stable. Because when you're in a very vulnerable situation, one is close to the child's abuse paradigm. And the child's abuse paradigm is, I'm in a crisis. The fact that I'm in a sustained crisis is identifying my environment as sociopathic to some degree. Because in an empathic environment, you are not in sustained crisis. In an empathic environment, all you do is say, hey, I need help, and you've got help within minutes. When you understand that you will be hated for asking for help, that your help will be ignored, that you will be blamed and resented for asking for help, you are in a sociopathic crisis or a sociopathic environment that is predicated on scarcity. The belief that there isn't enough to go round, leading to myopic competitive frameworks that generally create and perpetuate high levels of scarcity. And so you do not feel safe and cared for. When you feel terrified and you understand that you're dealing with a largely sociopathic and narcissistic populace, your path to survival becomes the adaptive path of the adaptive child. Namely, what do I have to do to you so that you get one of your ego needs met so that you'll help me? Do I have to make you look important? Do I have to lie and say that you're a great lover? What do I have to do? Please help me. I know you're not going to help me for who I am. We're in a sociopathic cult. But if I'm cute enough, if I bounce my breasts enough, what do I have to do to get some help here? And there is a rage in that dynamic because we would all like to live in a world where the innocence of need was responded to with the competency of adulthood. In a culture capable, with the vast amount of resources at our disposal, of allocating an adequate amount so that each person survived, felt secure in their survival, had a sense of love and belonging, had a sense of self-esteem, and was developing their gifts. I don't think for the most part we resent not having mega mansions for all. We don't need that. Nowhere in the hierarchy of needs is mega mansions for all, Ferraris for all. No. But we all need sustenance. And that is not assured with dignity in our culture. We are not at survival with dignity. And the feminine that is represented in the cycle of birth, you have the innocence and the vulnerability and the openness and the sensitivity of the feminine in the young infant and in the very elderly. And then you have the pinnacle of masculine assertive engagement, outward focus in the middle years. And in a chauvinistic cult, of course, the 18 to 30-year-olds are the pinnacle of the culture. And after that, you're, has-beens, it's like you. And before that, you're nobody, not worth, because it's chauvinism. And chauvinism doesn't work because it is based on an unscientific assumption that half of the self is worth more than the other. That half of a bicycle wheel is worth more than the other. The wheel doesn't turn unless you have a symmetrical whole. A scientist that's competent will point that out. But cults are not scientific. They're dogmatic. And we have institutionalized chauvinism in this terrain, in men and women equally. The amount of hatred that I have received from women for being vulnerable and needing is intense, because that's the amount of hatred they have towards their own needs and vulnerabilities, because they were hated for needing in the same way. So the way a wound enters is we express part of the psyche, the cult attacks that part, and it hurts. We express it again, it hurts even more. Then we start hating ourselves for expressing the part that gets hurt repeatedly. So we start hurting ourselves in advance and don't give the culture a chance to hurt us. And in doing so, what we trade is healthy pain for a sense of control as we internalize the abuse process. Now we feel powerful because we're hurting ourselves. Other people aren't hurting us, we're doing it. So we now have a sense of agency, which is, in some sense, progress, because it's very difficult to recover from a sense of helpless hurt and overwhelming pain in a sociopathic group. The pain just gets bigger and bigger. It becomes debilitating. So we seek agency. This also is not explained when you want to, understand why is someone hurting themselves when you don't even want to hurt them, but they think you might, so they quickly hurt themselves first, just so that they don't feel like you're affecting them as much as we actually do affect each other as individuals. the hierarchy, the value hierarchy, is a very important terrain in relationship. And you can think of it in the betrayal dynamic of pleasure and honesty. We all value pleasure and we all value honesty. But in a situation of sexual betrayal, we value pleasure more than honesty. And in a situation of integrity with our agreements, we value honesty more than pleasure. That's the difference, that one little flip. You see, in a hierarchical ranking of values, everyone values everything, just in a different order. And so you get to that point and you have two people. And for me, honesty is number one and pleasure is number two. For you, pleasure is number one, honesty is in number two. The probability field of our reality will put those in conflict at one point or another, where you have to choose between honesty and pleasure. What do you choose and what does your partner choose? You will fall apart and create pain unless you have the same hierarchy of values. Again, completely unexplored and unexplained in so much of the literature, as well as the fact that it's important to understand that the person who hurt you and who you hate and all this has the same values as you do. They just have them in a different order and for different reasons relating to a variety of different things. The paradigm of engagement is incredibly important because we default. When anything doesn't get talked about, we project ourselves and default to our way of doing things. And there are house builders in relationship. They want to find the right house and build the right relationship and build a family long term. They're house builders. They're looking for a piece of land to build the right house, and they're going to plan it all out, build it over a long period of time. And there are surfers. And these are just two of more than 30 distinct paradigms in the terrain of relationship. So when a surfer meets a house builder, they're both looking for the same thing. They're looking for a partner. One's seeking a partner to build a house, the other to surf with. And the relationship narrative for both of them may start the same way. You have a glass of wine, you talk, you find common values. But you're doing that so you can build a house together, and you're doing that so that you can ride a wave that crests in the morning and off you go and find the next wave. A house builder and a surfer will lose within the context of their paradigm. And in this case, the house builder will always lose because the surfer had the wave and the house builder wasted time for someone who didn't even understand the beginnings of building a house. You have failure built into a variety of different paradigms, which is why it's very important to understand the paradigm of the person you're with as part of a safe emotional conversation. What is your paradigm? My paradigm is I want to explore everything that I've never done before, and as soon as I've done it, I want to go on to the next thing. Well, it's good to know where I fit into your world. My paradigm is I'm trying to find someone to have kids with before I'm too old. Okay, next. My paradigm is I want to integrate my heart, mind, and body. And I'm in a very cerebral culture, and so I want a very affectionate, warm thing and I want to talk so that every feeling I have, I want to talk about it, and every sensation I have, I want to tell you about the feeling. I want to integrate my heart, mind, and body, and I feel disintegrated, and I'm looking for someone who wants to engage intensely on that level. So I'm looking for an integrating heart-mind-body relationship. Well, I'm looking to look good at my PTA group. Well, failed again. It's very abnormal to be integrated in our culture. If at the PTA meeting you're doing this and that, it's not going to make me look good, because in a cult that is fear-based, normal is what looks good, which is conformity. And what you're doing is intelligent, but it's not normal. And so you're not going to help me look good, which would be more of a survival-based thing. I can't survive in the world of my own. I have to look good so that I'll be strong enough to survive and in order to and belong. And so I'm trying to seek love and belonging by adapting to look good. This is an abuse contract. This is what she decided at 6 years old when who she wasn't good enough. To an incompetent father who didn't want a unique individual. He wanted someone to satisfy his narcissistic itch. And so, authenticity, who needs it? I need someone who jumps when I say jump. And so, that's the beginning of that seed. But we're not judging at this point, the hierarchy of relationship paradigms, though one could say that on a continuum of intelligence and health, there is a hierarchy of paradigms. We don't even have the conversation about the paradigm. And many paradigms are guaranteed to lose from the moment you set eyes on one another, because a surfer and a house builder always lose. An artist and a I want to look good to survive paradigm always lose. I want to express my art authentically. I want you to look good and make me look good. They're going to lose from day one. It's not about love. And you can successfully transcend your paradigm if you understand where it is on the map. It shows up as the lens that you're looking through in the first 5 minutes of interacting. So in the first 5 minutes, it would be intelligent to broadcast, here's my paradigm. Safety strategies are another thing that are not on the high map. The fact that for one person, their strategy of safety is, I believe the world is a scary place and is out to hurt me. 1. My strategy for being safe in a world that is out to hurt me is to hide. 2. 3. Therefore, I will lie and pretend to be someone I'm different, and I will get suspicious if anyone tries to see me clearly. Makes perfect sense. Begins with a belief based on experience that your brother asked what you're doing, and you told him, and he hit you, and then he lied to you, and then every time you told the truth, you got in trouble. Okay, so that's where that comes from. And the other person says, no, I want to be seen. I want to be loved. I believe the world is a safe and loving place, so I'm going to tell you everything, and I want you to tell me, because otherwise I'm not safe. People are lying and stuff. I'm going to fail. And it is true, you will fail when you have 1 or 2 people who believe that the best way to be safe is to be invisible through lies, deceptions, evasiveness, any number of things. You say, what are you feeling? Oh, I'm busy right now. Why are you trying to find out what I'm feeling? What's going on? Why are you trying to do this? You're trying to see where I really am so you can hurt me? Get out of here. And you have this, it's a very rampant safety strategy. And everyone needs to be safe. Is if you believe that the world is out to hurt you, the only way to be safe is to be invisible. Well, you've got to deal with a hurt child who could only be safe, and you've got to grasp the fact that as an adult, you cannot have a loving relationship without intimacy. And you cannot have the intimacy without seeing and being seen. And if you believe and are certain that you will die, basically, as soon as someone sees who you really are, you will run away from a relationship for the rest of your life. You cannot love and be loved without being seen. And you have the same vulnerability to hurting and being hurt in that terrain. But this is very, very basic distinctions. And the more abusive the culture, the more likely people are to seek safety through hiding and invisibility and copying and adapting and trying to say what she said. And the healthier a culture, the more someone says, this is what I like, this is who I am, this is what I need, this is what I want, And in a healthy culture, other people respond with loving them. I'm not the one for you, but let's get you connected with this person. It's great you need that. There's tons of that over here. That's wonderful. Thanks for telling me that. Let's give you more of that over here. This is fun. Let's meet each other's needs. Let's grow. We're in a paradigm of abundance, which the belief in the awareness of abundance tends to create behavior that produces a lot of abundance, mainly more empathic behavior, less sociopathic behavior. And finally, the terrain of ending. Every relationship that begins comes to an end. Makes sense? It's part of everyone who is born dies. Now, some relationships end at death, but none of mine have so far. Hundreds of relationships have ended, none of them have ended in death. So a relationship is going to have an ending, and most of them for reasons other than death. How do you handle an ending? Here's how you handle a beginning. How do you handle a middle? And how do you handle an ending? How do you know when to end a relationship? Do you wait till it's so bad you can't stand it? How do you end? Do you just stop returning phone calls? Do you text them? I'm done? Do you run off with their best friend so they get the message? How do you end with someone? Endings are incredibly important. And in a chauvinistic culture, they're not dealt with. In a chauvinistic culture, you're keeping steady, right? Oh, you failed, you're dead, you know. The cycle of life is not honored. The circle is not honored. You know, the release, the letting go is a very feminine and a very beautiful process. It's necessary for birth. Oh, a new baby is born. Oh, there was a death. How sad. You know, it's not about the quality of the death. The purpose of the death. Was it a great death? What did you learn in the dying? Did you learn how to really love someone by caring for someone so much that wiping their feces was an act of, you know, you enjoyed that more than watching porn or anything? You know, what was that like? No, I didn't learn anything in death, because death is a failure. You know, it's feminine. We don't deal with it. So I started dealing with endings early on, actually before coming to High. And then with the first few women treating me like that, I realized I can't have relationships with someone unless I know they're competent to have a good ending. Now, in a psychologically and relationally illiterate culture, you bring up the idea of a good ending, like, let's agree on what a good ending looks like. Could we talk about that before we get into this? And, well, why? No one else is talking to me about endings. Are you trying to dump me before we've started? No. I'm trying to break the chauvinistic cycle that says you're everything until I'm done with you, and then discards you and moves on to the next thing. That's no fun. I'm trying to break the cycle that you don't know how to end with me because you haven't asked and you haven't been trained. And I don't know how to end with you, but I'm asking. And I want you to teach me how to have a good ending with you. And, you know, this is a little bit hesitant terrain for most people. But I've learned that if you want to have a good relationship, begin relationships with people capable of ending well. And if someone freaks out at the idea, they are not capable of ending well. If someone cannot face the possibility that there might come a time when this needs to end for good reasons, then they're not an adult in the relationship. So they're not a safe partner to engage with unless you're an adult and can take care of yourself and can take care of them not being an adult. But it's generally a very good sign, by the way, in talking with hundreds of people about this, that if someone says an ending agreement, a thoughtful, kind ending, in the event that we decide to separate, that's good. That's great. What a great idea. here's how I'd like you to end with me, and how can I end with you? This is an incredibly confident, competent person who's understood the alternative in our dysfunctional way of shaming and dumping the people, often because we don't have the courage to own that the relationship has taken us out of our little circle of comfort into the wild west of unarticulated trauma, pain, addiction, insanity, and abuse contracts. And we don't know how to deal with it. Except we can end the relationship. And unfortunately, most of our partners are predisposed to relive the childhood abuse of saying that if someone leaves them, it's because they're unlovable. Which, of course, it is not the case. If someone leaves you, they are incapable of loving you, or are choosing not to, or are incapable of loving themselves in context with you, in a culture that doesn't teach them how. Why it is we live in a culture in which many of us know more about algebra than we know about abuse contracts is absolutely hilarious. But we do. We live in such a culture. And so, we need to begin well with a safe emotional container that is capable of holding the full range of emotions that in a healthy person will come up in any relationship. We need to know there's nothing wrong with encountering an abuse contract in a culture that demands them of us and our partners. But we need to know how to deal with it, and we need to understand that as long as a partner is loyal to an abuse contract, they are unlovable in technical terms. If they say yes when they mean no, you cannot love them technically. How can I love you? Well, Daddy, why don't you do this? Well, does that feel good? No, it feels terrible. But I can't say that because I'm trying to project what I think you want. That is technically unlovable. So the question is, will you break and tear up your contract with your father, with your therapist, with your abuser, so that you can be here in the present in relationship with me as an adult? If the response is that asking that question is too terrifying, you have a choice. You can go in there with their little girl or their little boy, and you can help them feel safe admitting the truth that they're not going to be killed and hit and humiliated and punished. And you can love that little boy and that little girl the way they were never loved. And you can let that little boy and little girl know that what you want as the healthy parent is the truth. And when they're willing to face death and take a risk on you and tell you the truth, you can celebrate the hell out of it. And you can understand that this isn't going to take place in between the commercials. It never has, never will. This is going to take a serious commitment. And it's going to be a bumpy ride facing death. To break the taboo of the cult. To break the taboo of the abuse contract. To pierce the veil of psychological and emotional illiteracy. And tell the truth and learn skills and fail and make mistakes and try again. And that you're worth it. That's a journey. It takes 3 or more hours a day or a deep sense of container and commitment that doesn't fit within a chauvinistic culture that purely measures income and ignores the rest. The disease in our relationship starts with the imbalance and the chauvinism of the culture and is healed by healing our personal chauvinism and saying, fuck that. Fuck that. that is not helping me be the person I want to be. And people who want me to fit in because it makes them feel comfortable that no one's breaking the taboos, no one's breaking they're not my friends. They're survivors in a trauma culture that haven't faced their trauma, in a culture that doesn't love them enough to teach them what trauma is. It's not their fault, but they are incapable of being competent allies in that fogged state. I'm going to go and connect here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to rely here. I'm going to grow here. This is a hero's journey into the unknown. And it is a distinct minority in our present time that complete the journey with the post-traumatic growth that comes with facing death, cultural death, financial death, emotional death, facing the terror of the abuser, internalized and externalized at different fractal layers, from government down to our ex or our landlord. To face that is a hero's journey. And it's something that we minimize to such an extent, that we dishonor to such an extent, that very few have the courage to go on it. These are some of the main highways in the landscape of relating. Each of these deserves 100 or so hours of practice and development and work. And in a loving culture that understands that we have far more energy than we can possibly do with, and we have far more time than we can possibly do with, we love ourselves enough to participate in these ways. In a culture of scarcity, where we are sure that we will not receive the love, that we cannot this, that we're not valuable, we try and fit in, bowing low, keeping hidden. It's too frightening to face the terror of the traumatic world without a single grown-up adult, inside or out, at our side. To embark on this journey without grace, without competency, without courage, without humility, without psychological literacy, is doomed to fail most of the time. It can fail by petering out. It can fail by reaching the point where neither of us will invest more in. It can fail with abuse. It can fail with faulty projections. It can fail in 100 different ways. I failed thousands of times until I pieced this map together. And it's a map that is sacred because it ties in with this cycle of the feminine love, loving enough to see and to learn, learning and seeing enough to become competent, competent enough to become successful, successful enough to produce love in the other. And by far the most satisfying experience that I've had, that's the biggest experience that I can think of in my life, has been flipping the 100%. The 100% paradigm is, let me ask for my 100%. So this is, it works within the child and adolescent paradigm because they have tons of things they want. And I never got it fully, of course, which was always irritating. And when I met my wife, I asked another question, and I stumbled into it. There was grace and help in various ways, and just because our cult is fucked up, and just because the human beings around us are as ignorant as we are, does not mean the universe is not filled with help and support if we ask and have humility and read books and various things like that. I asked how I could help my wife the most. I wasn't attracted to her. I had no interest in getting married. But I decided to ask for her 100%. What would 100% healthy support look like for her from her eyes? And that was the beginning of our relationship. And she knew how to receive and grow and receive and learn and grow like mad. I've never seen anyone do that in the way that she has. And perhaps it's because she was the first person that I began a relationship with. How can I be of service to you? And I discovered it was tons of fun to watch a person blossom and grow. I discovered what an amazing human being she was. You know, I'd never seen someone growing and blossoming so much and so beautifully and so many levels with such ease. And it was incredible. And in that sense, I think it is my first adult relationship, meaning that to the extent that I embody that persona, that it's one of the first times I felt like an adult. And because one learns in this culture that getting a car, smoking, drinking, the kind of heuristic shortcuts that an immature culture bestows, you know, you've gotten drunk and fucked in a bar, you're now an adult, or you have a mortgage, or whatever. I mean, this kind of simplistic cover for the fact that we don't know how to produce adults in our culture is on any predictable or statistical, significant level, leaves many. Am I an adult? I mean, my body's getting old. I still feel 5 years old. I still feel petulant. I still feel this and that and the other, and I think to a certain extent it is a posture. That the discipline of loving another person, whether you like them or not, whether you want to have sex with them or not, whether you need them or not, whether they're your 100% or not, the discipline of saying, I'm going to take a stand for you meeting your needs and growing to outgrow me, to outlive me, to become your best self and learn to do that on your own and enjoy watching that and enjoy playing a role. And I stepped into that in part out of immense frustration and anger that this wasn't happening towards me, that I was being thrown under the bus to protect High's abuse secret, was asked to sign an abuse contract. Only this time it was in writing. My parents' abuse contract was unconscious. And there it was. And I knew that just a single adult doing this for me would release like 400% more growth and potential and would allow me to become a lot of the person I wanted to become. And I hadn't met that adult. And so I was determined. I felt very clear what that would look like. And it wasn't coming. And it's like, what do you do when everyone around you is too incompetent to respond to a challenging situation? You can't receive if someone is unable to give that to themselves and to them. And of course, I was too incompetent to give it to myself. And we need at least one role model. We need at least one experience of what true adulthood is, to do that. So I just decided I was going to do that. And it's been phenomenal. It's been absolutely phenomenal. How can I be not so much your 100%, though that would be an easy way to flip that, and certainly in that, how can I be your 100%? But how do I need to behave in relationship to you so that you dramatically accelerate in a way that you want to and enjoy the meeting of all of your human needs to the point where you learn that so well, where you can meet your own needs better than I can meet your needs, and that's your graduation into adulthood and maturity, and so that you can do that for others, and do it for yourself. How can I do that? And it is incredible. It's the most exciting thing I've ever done, and that's a map. It's not the map of asking for my 100%. I nearly didn't meet my wife because I was in my, adolescent, this isn't good, and, that's not what I want. And so but then I had a sense that there was some reason that meeting this person would be a good idea. And I said, well, I can't for the life of me think of it what it is unless it's how I could be helpful to her. So that was my question at dinner. What's going on in your life, and where are you stuck, and what's this, and how can I be of service? And she was intelligent enough to lay it out. And so we dealt with that, and then more, and dealt with that. And pretty soon I started noticing that this was the most exciting part of my day. Her life was taking off right and left. And so she has grown into and is growing into my 100%, which in and of itself might need to evolve into, I think that I might rephrase my 100% of being with someone in the bliss of becoming their best self with mastery and learning how to do that for themselves, and watching that just grow, in an exponential wave. That being around someone in that state and in that process is my 100%, and that being a part of it is an honor.